Mobile gaming is often dismissed by core gamers, but from a product perspective, it's a masterclass in human psychology. Think about it. Why does a 30-year-old professional with a high-end PC spend like 15 minutes a day matching colored tiles, or opening loot boxes or grinding daily quests in a casual-looking mobile game? It's because the barrier to entry the mobile is practically non-existent. In mid-core titles, there is always a tutorial that holds your hand, guiding you through the mechanics step by step. Most of these titles are free-to-play, which removes their financial hurdle. But the real secret is that the core loop is designed for total simplicity, sharpened so you can literally play with one finger while doing something else. Today we're diving deep into the mobile market to deconstruct the final boss of the Match 3 genre, which is Homescapes. Now you might say, hey Katie, free-to-play isn't actually free. If you want the fancy stuff or faster progress, you have to pay, right? Whether it's a microtransaction or a season pass, there is this idea that greedy devs just want to milk you. As a developer myself, I'll tell you, partially that may be true, but I also believe that regardless of whether player pays, the game must provide fun. That's why we're here. A hard paywall is actually a bad form in modern design, so if you're forced to play into either pay or lose situation, it's like you ruin your retention, reputation, and the game itself. And in mobile, retention, playtime, and LTV, which is lifetime value, are everything. In the beginning, the game is your best friend. It showers you with easy wins, boosters, and free dopamine. It's a calculated honeymoon phase designed to show you exactly how good winning feels. But once you're hooked, the game subtly shifts. The difficulty spikes just enough to trigger an offer like, hey, just in case, here is a cheap one-time deal just for you, just today, just now take it, buy it, please. So this is where the game segments you. First, it checks if you're a payer or a non-payer. Later, it refines those offers based on your behavior. In the industry, we categorize paying users into 3 types: minnows, dolphins, and whales. And fun fact, whales like this, the big spenders usually feed the entire studio, so they make the massive transactions that keep the lights on. Usually, they represent only about 2% of the user base, while around 90% of players never spend the time, so the math is wild, but it works. We also have to look at when and why people play. Mobile titles are the ultimate time killers. They are designed for these in-between moments, like the morning commute, the elevator ride, or those 5 minutes of procrastination at your desk. The UI is built for this, like one-handed, very intuitive, and very instant. So while people usually associate the mobile market with puzzles and like a female-oriented audience, there is a massive chunk of the market dedicated to the idlers, management tycoons, and butlers that skew heavily like male, I would say. But well, today I want to focus more on the king of this casual plus world, as I said, so let's deconstruct Homescapes. Homescapes is a unique game in its genre that has spawned numerous successful and not so successful clones. It was the first in its category to shift the focus from a simple match 3 puzzle to a vivid, engaging narrative and home renovation. And well, in this analysis, I have aimed to provide the most comprehensive breakdown of the core game elements, mechanics, and monetization. Let's start with core loop, because the core loop is simple. The player helps Austin is our main character, to renovate his parents' home, and against characters in Austin himself unfold. To progress through the meta of the home renovation, the player must earn stars in core levels by solving match 3 puzzles. So let's talk about visual representation. The style of Homescapes, like its predecessor, the Gardenscapes, is highly recognizable, like a casual, even like very cartoonish aesthetic that gives the impression of watching like an animated film upon first contact. Bright, saturated colors make the overall image very juicy and can cause a player to get stuck observing different objects on the screen for a long time. The isometric camera allows us to fully examine all the details of the house, follow the characters, and even look at the areas that are still locked. The only problem that I believe exists is the visual overcluttering of levels. Like in Lilith Garden also faces this issue, I'd say, as do other mobile games with a large amount of constantly updated content. There are many many elements, many zones, and many items for upgrading, especially noticeable in later levels. And all of these must somehow harmonize because players primarily play with their eyes. The game also combines 2D and 3D elements, which adds a unique zest to the project. So let's talk about 2D assets. 2D elements are found in both the meta layer and the core one. All items in the game have several asset versions, like broken and a nice restored ones. Like sometimes an asset can consist of like 3 or even 4 stages. When replacing one asset with another, simple animation occurs, like a broom, rake, or watering can, or sometimes the object simply appears out of thin air, like depending on the asset category, honestly. So this is usually done via an effect like a cloud of dust, leaves, and etc., or particles. And additionally, like squash and stretch or bounce movements are applied to the asset to make its appearance look more natural. So you can see Homescapes has really quite a lot of ways how to present different assets on the scene. The board is a plane featuring 4 to 6 chip types and other game elements. The chip limit is tied to the characteristics of our perception, specifically the attention span zone. Notably, the chips and other elements are rendered in a pseudo 3D style, which gives them volume. This effect is achieved through several techniques, like for example a simple and often rounded silhouettes, a narrow color range with a single chip, outlining the contour, a shadow that mimics the silhouette of the chip or like object. There are also obstacles and other elements on the board that the player interacts with. These objects are grouped by the principle of similarity, like layers, like grass or foam, for example, liquids, containers or boxes, different generators like gramophones or portals, and walls or curtains. I will try to attach an image here. Now about 3D. Most game objects are made in a pseudo 3D style. However, the characters are rendered in full 3D. This decision, in my opinion, allows for faster and easier character animation, and it is also worth mentioning VFX effects. Like these small details make the image even more alive and saturated, like creating this sense of realism in what is happening. If we talk about UI and UX, the interface in Homescapes is simple and intuitive for the player, and its composition is also quite simple. For example, in top left corner there is like player profile with a number of lives next to it. In top right corner there are numbers of stars, coins, or settings. In central sides, like we can see icons that are located on the sides, like events on the left and everything related to purchases on the right. Fast, save, bigger bank, and offers and stuff. On bottom left corner there is a task section and the player's league next to it. Bottom right corner there is event icon and the transition button to the core level. The horizontal screen orientation helps also to arrange all these elements harmoniously while leaving space for the game background. Consequently, such a large number of elements looks visually more pleasant than in Royal Match, at least for me, with its vertical orientation, where it is sometimes difficult to see the background due to the abundance of interface elements. As I mentioned above, Homescapes was the first in its genre to adopt a narrative-driven approach. It is important to note that the meta is built not only in the storytelling, plot development, and character arcs, but also on the decisions that the player makes regarding the house interior. If we look at the narrative globally, we don't see significant changes in the main characters' arcs, like Austin is Austin, both at the beginning of the game and in the later stages. Catherine and Austin's parents also do not undergo any global transformation. This writing technique is used because the game is essentially infinite. In a traditional sense, it is physically impossible to implement a deeply developed and, more importantly, finished character. However, this does not apply to secondary characters within small storylines and events. Since we are dealing with a finite story in those cases, they are constructed according to standard principles. Next, let's look at the narrative within the main meta and LiveOps. The general narrative framework is divided into zones, each having its own self-contained story arc. Additionally, each zone has its own plotline, which may also have a secondary storyline like subplot. For example, in the arc where we repair William's car and prepare for the city parade, we also help Olivia with her jam, but this is like a secondary arc. And of course, within each arc, the day ends with a cliffhanger. For example, will we manage to fix the car? Why doesn't William want to get behind the wheel? What happened? The plot of Homescapes is simple but very engaging, thanks to well-placed hooks, a balanced script, and vibrant characters following its development. It's very interesting at any stage. Occasionally, there are rough edges and minor flaws that I noticed, but they do not spoil the overall impression of the game. For example, in the scene where Raoul arrives to fix William's car, I noticed some foreshadowing errors. For example, Austin mentions things like Raoul is going to do before they have been discussed in the plot. For instance, in a conversation with his father, Austin says Raoul is going to paint the car or something like this, even though we haven't been given such a task yet. And then later acts surprised when Raoul says that the car needs makeup, and Austin goes like, wow, what? Also, there are some timeline spoilers. When Austin's father pulls a steering wheel out of the refrigerator, Austin says Raoul will work on the car's interior tomorrow. And again, there were no time frames that had been established prior to this. And for me as a player, this was like a fat spoiler, since I thought we would be working on the interior today and we will finish this car today. So, you know. Also, sometimes I could notice some stylistic inconsistencies, like sometimes a character's speech can jump between styles. Overall, the quality and development of the narrative in Homescapes are at a very high level, which is evident in the quest and dialogue chains, as well as the speech characteristics of the character. In events and expeditions, there is usually an independent story arc unrelated to the main narrative. This could be anything from a zombie pirate attack to Indiana Jones-style archaeological excavations. These are simple but captivating stories that help dilute the routine gameplay and bring variety to it. For example, in expeditions, besides the new plot, a new mechanic is introduced, like for example energy management and clearing obstacles on the location. In all this, if you play mobile titles, there is this kind of expeditions, and this is what Homescapes also implemented. If we talk about level design, specifically core levels, so each core level begins with a unique arrangement of chips on the board and boosters. As you progress, the difficulty gradually increases, but there is always an alternation between easy and more difficult levels. Various obstacles or objectives are also added to the field, like carpets, chains, sculptures to be broken, and etc. So this creates variance within the core levels themselves, making the gameplay more engaging. And the start of each level is clearly structured. This is done so the player can identify and memorize these game objects. This is especially relevant for later stages of the game, where other elements, or like blockers, are present alongside the chips. From my observations are, like for example, approximately every 5 levels there is a mini game unrelated to the meta core. You know, like you've probably seen this advertisement of Austin, you know, being in some situation, suffering, trying to repair, you know, this sort of LiveOps mini game. I really liked the fact that they implemented that. That is nice. These are like very small levels that originally appeared in promotional ads, and they are interesting and fun, but due to frequent repetition, because for me they repeated like every 5 levels or so, they can quickly become tedious for the player and a bit boring. On the other hand, I really liked how Royal Match solved this problem, because they implemented King's Nightmare levels, which also I think were originally from advertisement, and they are structurally the same as core level, but with an added mechanics, like for example plumbering or timer that like you need to achieve the goal and stuff. This is quite interesting. Also, another stuff that really caught my attention is the board size. The core field is quite larger, for example, if we compare this to Royal Match, and this offers more opportunities for level design, though it carries the risk of overloading the field. However, in the case of Homescapes, the levels do not look overcluttered, even with a high volume of game elements on the board. And also every level has its own theme, and that is something cool if you pay attention to it, because it makes each level feel like unique and interesting, because you have to play a lot of them, and you know, it can be boring. So the theme of a level is also closely tied to the mechanics and objects within it. So gramophones in one instance, or cherries and jelly in another one, and that is cute. That is cute and fun. Regarding the design of the locations or zones the player renovates, they increase in size as the player's level grows. Initially, the player starts with like small locations where the final result can be seen relatively quickly. This is tied to player onboarding and engagement because everyone is interested in seeing how it will look like in the end. But later the zones themselves become larger, the number of interactive elements increases, and with them the number of interactions required to achieve the final look of an object also increases. Expedition levels differ structurally from the meta and core levels of the main game. The main goal is not just to make the player go from point A or point B by overcoming obstacles for energy, but also to place resources and energy parks at strategic points. So if we summarize it, the expeditions, like the map should be readable, like there are key objects for interactions and the player's path and points of interest are easily readable on the map because the player should understand where to go, what to see, where is like some sort of secret location and stuff. This should be readable, and in Homescapes we can see it quite clearly. Also, there is movement logic because the map is generally built according to standard principles, because first moving from bottom to top, then from left to right. This is based on a simple rule because most players perceive such movement as a progress. Pay attention to it next time you're gonna play. You will see that the going from bottom to top and from left to right really feels like a progress. Also, there is a sort of fog of war, normally it is called, but this kind of fog hides the locked part of the map, and the player usually cannot see the path but can see individual elements and structures, which motivates them to move forward. However, the fog near the open location is significantly thinner, allowing a glimpse of part of the locked map, and this again piques the player's interest and motivates them to keep going, like, well, what is this thing? I really just like a bit more, let's play 5 minutes more, and that's how they hook you. Now let's talk about game design, and in this section we will look at several individual aspects, specifically the meta and the features. So meta, I think there are some key elements that make it really memorable, like for example, in case of Homescapes, it is a recognizable character with a pet. Of course, we need a pet or cat or dog or something cute. That is a key. Also, this character has family and friends, because Austin, while not exactly like a role model in a classical way, I mean, he's not like a young man, he doesn't look very like handsome and stuff, but he's very pleasant and likable. At times he can be clumsy, funny, and that makes him relatable. There are no negative characters. There are temporary antagonists, but as I mentioned in the narrative section, they eventually change and transform into positive characters. Also, there is a strong positive storyline. Looking at the overall plot, one can notice a powerful positive narrative arc, which is exactly what attracts players. And of course, home upgrade. This is a debatable point, how much the house renovation is actually the leading driver in this case, even though the story is seemingly about that, but personally I would categorize it as a secondary, though still very important feature. And if we talk about features and events, the game has many diverse events that are constantly updated, like this LiveOps. In addition to their quantity, it is worth noting their variety, because constant leaderboards can bore a regular player. So here is what I noted. Time-limited events. These can be seasonal, weekly, daily, or even short events. For example, an event where players compete against each other for 30 minutes to use specific boosters to collect points, or an event where you must pass 7 levels on the first try. Something similar exists in Royal Match as well, by the way. Also, there are leaderboards. This is like a social component that every mobile game has. So it's always nice to satisfy one's gamer ego by ending up at the top of a leaderboard in an event. And overall, leaderboards work very well for retention and increasing session length. Also, of course, there are guilds and guild events. This is like another important social aspect. My feeling, and perhaps I just ended ended up in such a guild maybe, is that the community within guilds in Homescapes is not as active as in the Royal Match, for a simple reason. There are fewer points of interaction because you can request lives there, but thanks to numerous events and bonuses, you often play with infinited lives anyway. And in Royal Match, I was really hooked by the collection mechanic and the ability to request a missing card from your community. And this is a great feature, especially for collectors and those who like completing achievements, like me. Another thing is pacing. It feels like Royal Match, for example, has more short-term events. You are constantly being fed dopamine treats like rewards, boosters, whereas in Homescapes, while there seem to be just as many, the events tend to last longer. And this is a very subjective opinion, as both games offer a high volume of events. And the last is, of course, retention tools. There is a daily bonus that motivates players to return every day. This is this is the core of every mobile title, I would say, and it has positive impact on retention. Also, there are push notifications also that remind players about the start or end of events and further aiding player retention. If we talk about balance, the balance of the core levels is very well calibrated and pleasant. There is a gradual progression where easy levels alternate with difficult ones in a wave-like fashion. This progression not only keeps the gameplay engaging, but also gives the player a necessary breath after a hard level. What I specifically liked is this return mechanic, I would say. It's like if a player hasn't logged in for a long time, the first 10 levels after returning are easy, and only then does the difficulty start to ramp up. There are also these near miss situations, I would say situations where you are literally one move away from finishing a level. And it's of course, that is not a coincidence. That is designed specifically. And of course, when you miss your last opportunity, you can buy 5 extra moves for 900 coins. And this is a good mechanic that motivates players not to lose their progress and creates this natural soft currency flow. Now let's talk a bit about monetization, because monetization model is quite simple. It is in-app purchases and plus subscription and piggyback. Interesting fact that there is only one currency, excluding the specific LiveOps events and stuff. There are no these crystals or secondary hard currencies. And why, you may think? Well, because actually coins are already a limited resource. The player must put an effort to earn them, to get them for free, like passing levels or winning competitions and taking top places in rankings. So naturally, they can also be purchased. And coins are also spent on many things: lives, boosters, purchasing extra moves. And by the way, note that each subsequent purchase of extra moves increases the price. The first time you buy this, it costs 900, then it is 1,200 and stuff. Also, of course, we have bank that consists of soft currency packs and bundles, which, as I mentioned before, helps to understand what type of player you are. And later on, you can see even deals, let's say, that's specifically made for you. And there are also time-pressed offers. Of course, there are welcome offers. Welcome offers is a quite standard practice in mobile market as well. If we talk about the bank, it is traditionally divided into several sections, like bundles, which consist of coins and boosters, soft currency packs, and a special offers section. Notably, when you open the bank, special offers and bundles are displayed first. And by clicking more offers, the player can see bundles and packs across different price categories. This helps the developer segment the audience into minnows, dolphins, and whales, as I said before, and identify what kind of fish is in front of them, and from offers and promos tailored to that specific category. Now let's talk about first-time user experience and re-engagement session. It's worth mentioning the monetization flow during the first session after long absence, and in my case I hadn't logged into the game for over a month, couple of months, maybe 6 months, and upon my first return I was showered with these goodies in the form of boosters and unlimited lives for 2 hours. This was very pleasant and forced me as a player to stay in the game for a long time. And after approximately 30 minutes of gameplay, the first offer pack appeared. And first they show an offer for the core gameplay, then for the expedition, like this energy crystals, energy chargers. The offers seem lucrative, and if I hadn't accumulated many boosters, I likely would have used them, honestly. And well, 15 minutes later, the game offers like this home pass followed by a pop-up asking for an up rating. So as you can see, this is a very tailored experience. And well, as a result, during a single session, the player is introduced to the game's monetization and given the opportunity to choose the most comfortable path for them. Furthermore, the narrative not only drives the gameplay, but also positively impacts monetization. The player is eager to find out what happens next in the story, for example, in an expedition, and that makes them more willing to buy an offer to satisfy their needs. So if to summarize their monetization strategy, they use these narrative hooks for monetization, like let's know what happens next and stuff. Time-limited offers and events, single currency system, coins, piggy bank mechanic, battle pass and its associated perks, and push notifications. As I mentioned earlier, Homescapes is a very high quality game, so even the bugs I encountered cannot be called like very critical. What happened is like a couple of times I had this booster failure because boosters didn't trigger upon merging, and this might have been a misstep, but I was unable to capture this bug on recording, unfortunately. But that happened to me several times, so I suspect that this is a sort of a mini bug probably. Also, I had to update the app, and after an update a situation occurred where characters and interactive objects disappeared from the screen. This was fixed like very quickly. I think it was like in 1 or 2 hours they fixed that, but well, still, this is like small details, small bugs. So, Homescapes is a masterclass in retention, and from the in-between moment accessibility to the deep-seated psychological hooks of the renovation matter, it's a machine built for long-term engagement. Is it perfect? I would say almost yes. The visual clutter and occasional narrative hiccups are there, also some bugs, but as a case study in this casual game design, it's like the gold standard, I would say. If you want the full data breakdown, including the level topology and expedition mechanics, well, I can link the full deconstruction document below. And that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to put like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends, family, and yes, see you next time. Bye bye.